Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day it is where you are. Um, I thought I've done streams 3 days in a row. Counting today, this is a first. But I had some time. I'm traveling. I'm in a hotel. If you see the backdrop is a little bit different behind me. And so I thought I would do another coffee hour. And I was thinking about something. Pardon me. I was thinking about something uh, having to do with mass consciousness and the idea of an egregore or egregore. Egregore would be, I guess, the French pronunciation, um, but it's an interesting concept. So I'm going to talk about egregores and mass consciousness in spiritual and sort of magical context today. Um, so let me define egregore because it's maybe a little bit of an obscure term that some people may not be all that familiar with. The idea is that an egregore is a magical entity that comes out of the work or the consciousness of a group of people, a specific group of people. Um, I can give some examples of that. So, one example might be if you look at if you've seen or read Neil Gaiman's American Gods, for example, his model of how gods and goddesses through different cultures work is that they arise out of the group consciousness of a group of group consciousness of a group of people, of the consciousness of a group of people, right? And that it is attention and consciousness that feeds gods and goddesses and makes them more powerful. That's one idea, and it's actually one that I jive quite a bit with. And I'm not saying that spiritual entities don't exist as independent consciousnesses. It's just that in my experience, beings, very high level beings like angels and gods and goddesses and demigods and whatever, they are so beyond what human consciousness can grasp, their very nature, that we shape them. That's why we have anthropomorphic gods. We have gods and goddesses, or if you are, believe in the God of Abraham, you probably have the concept of God being this bearded guy who lives in the sky, that sort of thing, human like. And it's one of the reasons for that. Although there are certainly examples of gods and goddesses throughout history that human history that do not reflect anthropomorphism, right? So, for example, the ancient Egyptians did have anthropomorphic gods. They had therianthropic gods, so that were half animal, half human. But they also worshipped the sun disk, or the uh, hadit, the winged disc, right, which is one form of Ra as he moves through the sky. I'm not an expert, but so an egregore can be created purposefully. There are examples of this. There are examples of groups getting together to create artificial magical entities. In individual magical work, there is the idea of the servitor, and that's very similar. That's like an individual creating magical entity. Um, in Tibetan and Nepalese Buddhism, there is the idea of a tulpa, and the tulpa is a magically created entity that's usually created by an individual. But mass consciousness, talk about mass consciousness a little bit, and it's how powerful it can be. And there are references to this in many systems. I think there's a passage from the Bible that says, whenever three or more are gathered in my name, I will be present, right? Basically prescribing three people getting together to do prayer work, right? To do the work of Christianity, um, bringing a level of mass consciousness to it. personally, I have participated in lots of group ritual work and group journeying, shamanic journeying. And I had an experience that will illustrate sort of how I feel about it, my experience of it. And your experience can be different, and that's totally fine. I respect everybody's experience. Um, but one of the, let me get the chat up just in case somebody's wants to chat. Pardon, I still have a cough. I'm feeling totally fine. I just haven't gotten rid of my cough yet. And I'm drinking once again, drinking Dunkin' Donuts coffee. They don't sponsor me, but maybe they should. I don't know. It is Shamanic Coffee Hour after all. So I'll give a couple of examples of my experience with group consciousness in doing spiritual work. One that happened most recently, I was leading a group of people journeying together, doing shamanic journeying together, and they were doing some very specific work. I was not journeying. I was holding the space for the journey, playing the music that people were journeying to, etc. And while they were journeying, this really strong image popped into my head, and I grabbed a pad of paper and I drew a really quick sketch. And when they were done, people came back from the journey and were sharing what they had experienced. And one person shared something that matched what I had drawn. And I said, I got to show you what I just drew. And I held it up, and she was kind of flabbergasted, blown away. This is not me being, a mind reader. This is not me being any more sensitive or psychic than anyone else. It's riding a current that's being generated by a group of people doing the same thing. Is there scientific evidence of this phenomenon, of this mass consciousness directed affecting reality? I think there is. I think there is actual scientific evidence. I think the transcendental meditation folks, the Maharishi folks, have done experiments where they would get a large group of meditators together in a city or whatever, and you would actually see the crime rate drop in that area, right? The violent crime rate and the crime rate drop in that area. They would also have these, they have random number generators that are physical. They use a physical process to generate random numbers. It's a little bit beyond what I know, but they use like the radioactive decay of a specific atom to generate ones and zeros, which is what computers use. And when they run these things in a room full of people meditating together, the random number generators become measurably, significantly, numerically significantly less random. They become more organized. So it's evidence of mass consciousness affecting physical reality, at least at an atomic level. I find that type of research absolutely fascinating. We know that consciousness affects reality. We know that observation changes the way things behave physically, right? The famous quantum science double slit experiment. So if you have people all focusing on the same thing and doing the same work, you're moving the current kind of in one direction and can amplify the effect. It's pretty powerful stuff. The other example I can think of that's pretty recent, I can't remember which group. It was some group on social media that I belong to, and people do different sort of metaphysical experiments. And somebody created a sigil, and a sigil is a magical symbol that's used to focus energy and release energy and all kinds of stuff. Sometimes sigils represent magical entities. And so somebody created a sigil called the cash cow sigil. And you can think of it as like the symbol of Taurus, which is a circle and a half circle on top, so it looks like the head of a bull. And inside that was a Norse rune, actually, that also stands for sort of cattle and money and that sort of thing. And somebody was like, let's try this. Let's all work together with this. Everybody, draw the sigil in red and focus on it. Excuse me. And see what happens. And a bunch of people who did this experiment reported strange influxes of money, right? It's interesting. So this was this was artificially created with intention and took advantage of a group of people focusing on the same thing at the same time in the same way, and created an effect in physical reality that was measurable. So pretty powerful stuff. There are other groups who have done specific egregore work, meaning they have done magical work together synchronistically, simultaneously, in order to create actual magical entities. So think about the story of this is not an egregore, but the story of the golem being created by the rabbi, which was an entity created out of clay and brought to life and using Kabbalistic magic, and sort of also where the idea of Frankenstein came from, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, influenced by the story of the golem in Prague. And you can look that up. There's interesting stories there. Whether they're true or not doesn't matter a whole lot. And that leads me to kind of an interesting point as well. In the world of mass consciousness and power and magic, historical truth is not that important. So, for example, this may sound strange if don't come from this world, but there are people who do Christian magic. For many people who are Christian, come from the Christian faith, this might sound blasphemous or antithetical, and I can't tell you whether or not it is. That's a matter of opinion. But there are people who do Christian magic. There are people who do magic using saints and images of Christ and all of these things. And for people who are Christian, the birth, death, and resurrection of Christ, the redemption of sin through the resurrection of Christ, is fact. It's historic fact, I would say, for most people. For other people, it may not be. Other people might not believe that actually, factually happened. Well, other people don't believe that factually happened. And the historicity of it is not important. You might think it's important. It might be important to your faith, but I'm talking about for magical effect, for example. So 1 billion people go to Mass every week and take the Eucharist, in the Catholic Church anyway, and take the Eucharist and pray and do the rituals, all of that stuff. That in itself is powerful, creates an extremely powerful current. I would argue that the church has known this for a very long time, for the entirety of its existence. And it's one of the reasons why they are so against birth control, because they know that the more they can get their numbers up, the more powerful the religion is, the more powerful. And you could I'm not going to argue anybody's belief system or about religions or anything like that. Um, but you would have to look at it and agree that the Catholic Church has wielded a tremendous amount of power over the centuries. They have their own country, right? The Vatican is its own country. They have incalculable wealth. They have a great deal of the world's population um, listens to the one guy on top, right? It's power. There's a lot of power focused in there, right? And they also have a huge archive of um, information that's not available to the public, right? You can't just go walk into the Vatican archive and check out ancient books and that sort of thing. So it's extremely powerful in many ways. It's temporally powerful, financially powerful, spiritually powerful. And again, the historicity of anything that happened, while it might be important for the faith of the people who believe in it, if you have a billion people performing the same acts every week, focusing their energy on your icons and praying for your power and all of these things, like that is going to build an amount of power that is kind of unparalleled. So this is where organized religion can be extremely powerful. I'm not arguing for or against organized religion. I don't tend to participate in organized religion myself, but people who do are, I'm totally fine with that. But this is where the power can come from. It's from getting people into the same space and imbuing that space with the power of consciousness, of prayer, of all of these things. So this is also where any sort of ceremonial magic comes into play. So covens of witches who get together, or cultic groups, or people, anytime people gather to perform ritual together. Not all groups are the same. I'm not saying that, because you'll have groups that are basically dabblers, and you'll have groups that are basically, for example, initiatory bodies, where you pass through lots of training and knowledge transfer and going through different levels and all of those things to get to the sort of the quote unquote the big or more advanced rituals. Those rituals become more and more powerful because the individuals who are participating, their consciousness is changed. Excuse me. But it can be incredibly powerful, and this is why shamanic drum circles, are very, very powerful. And one of the ways that I describe shamanic circles, it's like if you ever did that thing when you're a kid where you get a bunch of people in a pool and you all move around the pool, around the edge of the pool in the same direction, and you start to have 5 or 10 bodies moving around a pool in the same direction, and you build a current in the pool, and you can get a whirlpool going in the center of the pool. Well, it's like that with spiritual energy, right? So you get a bunch of people kind of moving in the same direction in circles that I've participated in. All movement is essentially clockwise, right? And you could do things counterclockwise, but if everybody's moving in the same direction, when we drum and dance, or we go around the circle passing a talking stick or whatever, everything's moving in the same direction, and it creates this kind of vortex of energy. And for me, it's palpable. You can feel it. right? You can feel that energy moving around, and it becomes synchronistic, where the not synchronistic, um, synergistic. Sorry, I used the wrong fake business word. Synergy, where the sum of the parts is greater than the individual parts put together, right? The parts, when they're moving together and they're focused, become much more powerful than what you would have as individuals working separately. You're reinforcing, right? So if you think of a swing, right, you're pushing somebody on a swing, okay, and you give it a little push, and the person moves a little bit, and then they swing back, and then when they start to swing forward, you add a little bit more energy, and you add a little bit more energy, and you add a little bit more energy, and it has to do with timing, and then the swing starts swinging more and more and more and more, right? Good morning again. I know, 2 days in a row, right? Well, actually, this is my third day in a row. I did one 2 days ago, but it was not in the morning. It was in the afternoon. I'm still, as you can see, I'm still traveling. That's why I'm drinking Dunkin' Donuts, because it's what's available and in a hotel room at the moment. But we're talking about group consciousness, mass consciousness, egregores, ritual work, right? So ritual work, you can do rituals as an individual, of course, but rituals can become more powerful when you have groups of people doing the same ritual or participating in the same ritual. Um, I've experienced a lot of group ritual in my life, and um, you know, that includes, church. I've been in churches, all different kinds of churches, Buddhist temples. Um, uh, I've been to Jewish services. I've been to all kinds of stuff, and I think that's it's all extremely fascinating to me. So, religious ritual, religious ceremony is designed to to build power, to build this spiritual power in different ways. Um, the prime example of this is the Catholic Eucharist, right, where you take the body and the blood of Christ, and it's substantiated by through the power of the priest who has apostolic succession, and there's all of these connections, right, that happen, and you take that power in. I'm not an expert in Catholicism, but you are imbibing the body and blood of the sacrificed God, so that you can get the grace and get the forgiveness and get the power that He brings, and then go about your day. And I've talked about this before. When I was married, my in-laws are Catholic, were Catholic, and they had come for a visit, and I had uh, I had been raised in a couple of different religions. Growing up, I had attended a couple different churches, but never a Catholic church, so I didn't understand that much about it. And they asked me to find mass close by that they could go to. They go to mass almost daily, I think. Actually, they're retired, and um, so I found a church that was within walking distance, and I was living in the city at the time. And the church offered masses in different languages. They had mass in Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, English, and I said, well, they have this service, but the English mass isn't till later. And they said, yeah, we don't care what language mass is it. And it struck me a little strange, because I was like, well, don't you need to understand what the person is saying? And the truth of the matter is that that's not all that important, particularly to people from an older generation, who grew up during a time where mass was in Latin. And if you didn't speak Latin, you didn't know what was going on, and that wasn't the important aspect of it. The important aspect was receiving the Eucharist, getting the blessing and the whatever from the priest. So I learned some stuff from that. I was like, oh, you don't care that the mass isn't a language that you can understand. You just need to be there for that empowerment. And that would be the same in other. I'm trying to think of some other situations. So potentially some Buddhist, like tantric Buddhism, for example, where you're getting empowerments from from a lama, and you may not understand what they're chanting, and that's not, again, not the important aspect. The conscious understanding is not necessarily the important part. There are other spiritual systems where conscious understanding is incredibly important. So I won't argue for or against either, but I personally would probably not participate in ceremonies that I didn't have at least some understanding of what was going on. But I'm intellectually curious that way, I guess. So, like I said, an egregore, the strict sort of occult definition of an egregore is a magical entity created by a group, usually on purpose. And this has been done. There's stories, you can find them on the internet, where they have created this mass consciousness around things. So it kind of leads me to I'm going to talk about Lovecraft, for example, right? So H.P. Lovecraft, if you don't know, I'm sure most people have an inkling of who he was. He was an author, lived, in the early 20th century, late 19th, early 20th century. He wrote a lot of what's called these days strange fiction. So, kind of a combination of science fiction and horror. Wrote about, like, created this whole universe where these creatures were these elder gods. They were these alien races, and some of them took up residence on Earth and all kinds of stuff, right? And uh, wrote a lot of stuff and created a world, and then other people took his ideas, mostly with his permission, and wrote stories in his mythos. So there's this whole Lovecraftian mythos, right? A mythology that he's created, a set of stories that reflects this horrible, horrific underpinning of the universe, where these dark gods are, waiting to, there's a whole doom vibe, right? We're doomed, kind of vibe, and that's where the stuff is, psychologically affected a lot of people. Now, the other aspect, and I'll mention this, Lovecraft was a straight up racist. And a lot of his stuff, I didn't understand. Like, I read his stuff when I was a kid. I liked horror and that sort of strange fiction stuff. I didn't understand a lot of the allegory. The allegory in his writing was, a lot of racist stuff in there. The series Lovecraft County was created to use the Lovecraft mythos to highlight the horrors of like Jim Crow racism in the U.S. Really well done, kind of turning the tables on the racism of Lovecraft. But regardless, one cannot deny the effect that Lovecraft had on popular culture. And even, he mentions this book, the Necronomicon, in his writings that he, made up. It's not a real book. And then somebody took a book of Sumerian spells, I guess, Sumerian demons and gods and goddesses, whatever. And, back in the 70s, and called it the Necronomicon. It's known as the Simon Necronomicon because it was published by somebody named Simon. Um, and it was published in New York, and we know who published it and all of these things. But it, first editions of that are, you can't even find them. They sold out. People bought other, it's been reprinted a million times. You can buy it probably for $6 or something on Amazon. And you can get the Simon you can probably get 5 or 6 books called the Necronomicon. Also shows up in popular culture quite a lot. Army of Darkness, the Necronomicon, the Evil Dead series, and the Army of Darkness that shows up in there as well. So it's supposed to be a book of evil spells, spell work, a grimoire kind of thing. So, in that way, the fiction of Lovecraft affected popular consciousness. But what sort of sticks out to me is that I'm aware of people doing ritual and evocation work and that sort of thing using entities that were essentially made up by H.P. Lovecraft. But and so the question is then, is that folly? Is that just people imagining stuff? And the answer to that is, yeah, it is. Yes and no. It's not folly, and it is people just imagining stuff. But you have these entities that exist, at least in mass consciousness, that, we, understanding that we're creating our reality, mass consciousness, our consensus consciousness creates a lot of the physical reality that we live in. So I don't think it's complete folly to take something, a fictional mythos, and all all myths are fiction to some extent, right? Made up by people, but important. So the stories are allegorical, but there's also mystical aspects that are woven through them just because they're coming out of consciousness. I actually think that Lovecraft tapped into an undercurrent, like this really strange undercurrent of consciousness that was prevalent at the time. There was a lot of weird occult activity going on. He's from Rhode Island, New England. I've lived in New England my entire life. New England is a very strange place. Lovecraft came from here. Stephen King comes from here. There's a lot. New England's a beautiful place. Lots of amazing stuff in New England. There's also a lot of weirdness. A lot of weirdness in New England. And one of the things I was really surprised by when I started my journey in shamanism is that Maine, the state of Maine, this tiny little state with just over 1 million people in it, up in the corner, it has a huge shamanic community. And I have students from New York City and California and Oregon and all of these places, partially because they're not near anybody who's teaching shamanism. But I know tons of shamanic teachers in Maine, in the state of Maine. And so we could argue whether or not shamanism is weird. I practice shamanism, and I will fully admit that I'm a weird person and enjoy weird things. But yeah, there's a lot of strangeness and weirdness and strange activity. If you've ever spent time in Salem, Mass, yes, it has the history of the witch trials there, but it is now like witch city. You can, you can't, you throw a rock down the street and hit, 20 studios that are offer tarot card readings or other types of esoteric services in Salem. Salem's actually really cool. It's one of my favorite places to go visit. The vibe is somewhere between frightening esotericism and colonialist, um, hanging people for witchcraft, and full on kitsch. There's a statue of Elizabeth Montgomery from Bewitched in a public square there. Um, all kinds of fun going on in Salem. There's a vampire temple in Salem. There's the temple of Satanic Temple is in Salem. You can actually rent a room there and spend a night. I was funny because I found it. And I was looking for hotels in Salem one time. I was like, huh, and it was $666 a night. So, excuse me. So there's a lot of weirdness centered around here, and I think Lovecraft tapped into that a little bit. And the time that he was writing was a time where racism was still and will probably always unfortunately be an issue, but was prevalent. You know, in the U.S. there were we were in the midst of Jim Crow and laws, um, and there were still places. There were still lots of unexplored places in the world, and so we get the pictures of deep dark Africa and weird goings on in Asia, and all of the stuff, things that were to most people living in New England, especially, like beyond strange, beyond unusual. We weren't exposed to things like yoga yet, or you know, or there was some stuff going on, but it was all hidden away. It was all hidden away, and so the stuff that gets hidden like that, there is the perception sometimes that it's threatening or evil or whatever, and it may or may not have been to some extent, but certainly not all of it. Anyway, I think there are people who practice ritual magic. Probably not that many of them, but I'm aware of some of it happening based on the mythos of H.P. Lovecraft. And you know, one reaction to that might be, well, that's all made up. That's just fiction. But then again, so are the stories of Hercules, and so are the stories of Osiris, and those are myths that are important, that carry some level of spiritual truth. And if you have enough people who put their belief in them and put religious and spiritual practice behind it, they can become very powerful, at least transformers of consciousness. And because consciousness affects our physical world, they can lead to changes in physical reality, in my opinion. This is the power of mass consciousness and egregores, that sort of thing, is that we, again, going back to Neil Gaiman's model of how gods and goddesses work in the book American Gods, and the I guess there's a series, American Gods as well. These gods and goddesses are brought to life and empowered through the attention, through the consciousness of humans. So the more humans worship them, I thought it was really funny there. And I don't mean to offend. I don't mean to offend anyone through by saying this, but there's a really funny part in American Gods where they go to Astara, the goddess of spring, and it's like Easter at her house always. And so there's bunnies hopping around and eggs and all kinds of stuff. And there are like 50 different Jesuses there, right? Because the image of Jesus is different in different cultures, right? There's The white Jesus and the black Jesus and the China, the Asian Jesus and the this and that. And there's all of these different versions of Jesus there. Um, and I understand people are Christian, they're like, well, there's one Jesus, but you would have to admit factually that the image of Jesus varies depending upon the culture and depending upon the religion, and that most of the images we have in the West of Jesus come from Renaissance, or based on Renaissance paintings of Europeans. And Jesus was not a European and was not alive during the Renaissance. So the images that we have of Jesus are probably not very representative of what he may actually have looked like. Um, and that there are icons and images of Jesus from other cultures that don't closely resemble the Renaissance-based European paintings. So I always thought that was interesting. Anyway, an interesting take on things, and so I do, even though Neil Gaiman is writing as fiction, I do think like his model of how things kind of work is a bit apt. It does reflect some level of reality, which good writers will always do. Good writers will always reflect some level of reality. So let's talk about belief a little bit and the importance of belief and faith and whatever it is you're doing. there are certain things in spirituality for which belief is not incredibly important, right? So you can do certain rituals not knowing if this being you're praying to or evoking or invoking exists outside of your imagination or exists outside the imagination of a group of people, and it will still work, right? There are certain things that will still work. However, belief is extremely powerful. Belief is an extremely powerful driver, right? Somebody who has full faith in what they're doing is going to place a certain amount of power behind it. In the way that I describe this, it's like when I was teaching martial arts and you taught somebody to punch another person, right? You would teach somebody to punch somebody really hard. You don't teach them to punch the person, you teach them to punch through the person, to aim beyond a couple of feet beyond the person. Why? Why is that important? Why is aiming beyond the person instead of aiming at the person important? Because your body will follow your intention. And if my intention is to punch through the person as if they're not there, my body will push my energy, my physical energy, all the way through that target. But if I'm aiming at the surface of the person, my body, as I'm about to punch this person, my body will actually hold back to some extent, and I won't hit that person very hard. Easily demonstratable in I've done student after student after student. I demonstrated this with them, not me doing it, with them doing it. Like, okay, punch, get a punching bag, hit that. Okay, now aim 2 feet behind that, and they would hit it, and they would hit it incredibly hard, right? Their body was putting on the brakes. This is how belief and faith works as well. If I believe in what I'm doing, if I have faith in what I'm doing, my consciousness won't hold back. My consciousness won't stop the energy from flowing, which is important. It makes what I'm doing much more powerful. So if you have a large group of true believers, very frequently, this is when, quote unquote, miracles will happen, right? Things will, you'll see miraculous healing happen. You'll see things transform into other things. You'll get statues that bleed. You'll get, not all miracles. Most things that people experience as miracles turn out to be something else, right? Statues that are crying, or whatever. Um, this is why the Catholic Church who will stamp their approval on things that are miracles, will do a scientific investigation of things, right? Because sometimes stuff happens and we want to attribute it to you know spiritual activity, and we just don't know what's going on. So sometimes you'll have a statue that appears to be crying, water's running down its face, and they'll, oh, this is a miracle, and they'll investigate, and they'll find out, oh, there's a water leak above the on the floor above the statue, kind of thing. It's not that the people who thought it was a miracle were lying or trying to put one over. They were just mistaken as to the cause. So they will investigate. But actual miracles happen all the time. The fact that I think that we exist, that we can have a subjective experience of reality, is a constant and ongoing miracle. We just don't see it as such because we're in it. This is our reality. This is the way things show up to us all the time. So I've spoken about this before, but if I hold up this Dunkin' Donuts coffee cup, I promise I'm not sponsored by Dunkin' Donuts. I'm just drinking Dunkin' Donuts right now. If I hold up this cup, what's happening is, for me, light from various sources is bouncing off of this and hitting the back of my eyes, which creates an electrical signal. That triggers some things in my brain, my memories, my this and that, this and that, and this and that. But in my consciousness arises the subjective experience of a 3D object, this cup. This cannot be explained by electrical activity in the brain. This subjective experience of this cup, or smelling the coffee in it, or tasting the coffee in it, that science cannot explain consciousness, cannot reduce consciousness to physical processes happening in the brain. It's considered one of the hardest problems in science, and who knows if they will ever get to the bottom of it. So right now, if you're looking at me through your computer, you might have the experience of this person sitting in front of you and talking, but none of that is real in a real sense, right? Like, it's just light coming out of your computer screen or sound waves hitting your ears. But you have the subjective experience of seeing and hearing a person talking that's arising in your consciousness. To me, that is a profound and ongoing miracle, that we have consciousness, that we have the ability to have this subjective experience of the world. And I can't think of a reason for that, an evolutionary reason for that, other than consciousness seems to be the natural state of the universe, right? There's things, lots of things can exist without subjective consciousness. So we could too. We could be completely instinctual creatures without the ability to perceive things like music, right? Music is amazing. Music affects us. It affects our consciousness significantly. What is it? It's wavy air. Wavy air hits my eardrums and causes an electrical signal to go to my brain. And then I have the experience of listening to a concert, or listening to a podcast, or having a conversation with a loved one. That is a persistent and ongoing miracle to me. Like, I'm blown away. Like, the more I think about that, the more I'm blown away. But because it's our everyday experience, we often don't place weight or significance on that. We're looking for, lightning to strike and rainbows and fireworks and loud voices coming out of the sky to say, oh, that that's a miracle. but our consciousness, our awareness is a miracle. And it's absolutely fascinating, and it's absolutely unexplainable at this point, unexplainable by science. You know, I believe, people that try to reduce consciousness to brain activity are gonna be, we're, it can't be done. Has not been done. I believe that the brain is a receiver. It's like it's like a two-way radio. It receives and transmits consciousness, but it's not, you know, the radio in my car. There aren't little people living inside the radio in my car having a conversation or playing music. It is a receiver of the signal, and that signal comes out. It transforms that signal into music, and I think the brain is somewhat similar to that. So anyway, I am coming to the end of talking to you all. I am gonna do my best. I probably won't be doing 3 in a row like I have been the past few days, just because that's my schedule doesn't normally allow for that. But it has been nice to chat with everybody, um, again, on a more regular basis, and I'm going to do my best to get back into it. Oh, thank you so much. You have a nice day as well, and I always appreciate when you come on and say good morning. um, and I will talk to you all really soon. I hope you have a great day. It is, as I record this, if you're watching the recording, it is Indigenous Peoples Day, and so I just take a moment to, if you're in the U.S. especially, recognize that you know the recognize the plight of Indigenous people. Take a moment to think about that, and to respect the the vibrant and existing cultures of Indigenous people everywhere. And we will talk